Today I'm joined by Stephen Wolfe. Stephen Wolfe is a country scholar at Wolfeshire in central North Carolina, where he lives with his wife and 4 children. He recently finished a postdoctoral fellowship at Princeton University's James Madison program in American Ideals and Institutions, and he is a co-host of the Ars Politica podcast and has written for many outlets, including First Things, Chronicles Magazine, and History of Political Thought. He's also the author of The Case for Christian Nationalism. Welcome, Stephen.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
I'm really glad to have you on. Multiple people have told me that this is a necessary conversation, that you should be on the show because you've written kind of probably one of the most comprehensive books for a certain segment of my audience, one that unites many strands and also I think makes a solid case. I mean, it's in the title itself for something that people see as a potential solution to our woes, which are many. So maybe we could go in a bit into the substance of the book and Christian nationalism. I mean, what is Christian about it in your conception, and what is nationalistic? I mean, these are two magisteria that can work together in a pleasant way, but often have not, don't need to necessarily go together. So I wonder where the balance comes in there and how they do work together.
I always get, that's always the first question. It's interesting.
Oh God.
I mean, but it's
the most natural one, I think.
It's always what is Christian nationalism? And it's an interesting question. I mean, it's an important question, and I'll answer. But I was thinking about this the other day, that there's a lot of things in politics and just in really anything where we kind of just, where people have several different definitions, but we kind of just are okay with that, I guess. So like you ask, what is conservatism? And you have, obviously, it's Roger Scruton's conservatism. Is it Yarm Hazoni? Is it something National Review would say? So it's one of the, like, conservatism is one of those terms that has different definitions, and everyone's kind of comfortable with that. But everyone's kind of uncomfortable with the fact that Christian nationalism doesn't have this very kind of clear definition that everyone who claims the title kind of orients around, and that's fine. But it's I think because it's kind of this new movement or this new kind of idea that people are now presenting a positive case for it. People are kind of desperate to kind of get some sense of what someone means by it, and I think that's all in development. I mean, for me, for my book, I try to present Christian nationalism as nationalist, meaning that I basically work from the term nation, and I say, what is a nation? And then I go to nationalism, because obviously the ism relates to the nation in some sense. And then what makes it Christian? And so it is nationalist in the sense that there's a people have a collective identity. They have a certain self-affirmation as a people. They're in a way self-aware, self-conscious of their kind of group identity. And then from that identity, they say, well, we ought to protect and promote ourselves as a people. That is, we establish laws, we have customs, we have a way of life, and that's the sort of ism. So by the nationalism, I don't mean go off and go to war or some sort of violent nationalism, however you want to define it. It's more in the sense of a kind of a self-conception from which the people as a collective entity say, we're going to act for our good, which is as simple, again, as making laws. So, but what makes it Christian? What makes it Christian is that the nation itself understands itself as a Christian people. So they say, we are a Christian people, we are a Christian nation, and we ought to act in light of that, meaning as a people, we should try to preserve our Christian heritage and promote the Christian faith among us. And so that's the Christian nationalism. It's a self-consciously Christian people essentially telling themselves, we're going to promote our good, which includes the Christian good, or that includes the church, that includes like the highest good, which is the good of eternal life in Christ. And so we're going to promote that as a people for ourselves. And so that's the Christian element. It's not simply, quote, Christian values. It's not simply ending abortion or, something about LGBT. It's not simply about that. What the main aspect of the Christian part of the Christian nationalism is again saying we as a Christian people are going to promote among ourselves the highest Christian value, which is the worship of God in Christ. So I think that's probably it's a little bit different than I think what people assume. People often assume it's about Christian values or it's about America was God's chosen country and we ought to go back to that. It's actually something I think more broadly applicable. So Christians in Romania or Poland or Hungary or Slovakia, these people who generally think of themselves as a Christian people, I think that my theory, from my standpoint at least, can apply to any of those people groups. And so it's not just about the United States and kind of the heritage of faith in the United States.
So in the United States, do you see the entire U.S. territory potentially as a Christian nation? Could there be a Christian nation within the United States? Could there be multiple Christian nations within the United States? How would that play out in your vision?
Yeah. So in the book, I try to lay out the principles, and then principles have to be applied given the circumstances. So in the American political tradition, there's a tradition of federalism, meaning as you know, and I'm sure your audience knows that there's essentially a kind of like a federal, national, central government, whatever. But there's also a degree of sovereignty among the individual states. And originally, each state had the power, was permitted to have some civil action or government relation to religion or the church. So there were several different quasi establishments in the early republic, American Republic, in the different states. So there was a promotion of Christian religion back then, but not every state exactly had the same thing. Some kind of had more extended moral liberty. But the point being is that I think that within the American federalist or federal constitutional tradition, there is room to have different states do different things with regard to religion, which that's essentially been closed off to us since after the jurisprudence of World War II. So I think that would have to be walked back. But yeah, in the United States, there's a legitimate question as to whether it's proper to call us a nation, given the regional differences. I mean, I grew up in California, and I now live in the South. The California is different than the South, so it does seem as if it's kind of an empire in a way, but that's the kind of the nice thing about the federalist system is that each state should be allowed to say, hey, we are certain people, and we can kind of govern ourselves as we want to. So I don't know if that totally answers your question. It's a very tricky subject when we talk about kind of different nations within a nation state.
Yeah, I mean that the nation itself. I mean, as someone coming from Eastern Europe, this is a very kind of fragmented and a place that's kind of rearranged itself quite a lot. I live in Transylvania in Romania, and this is kind of it's very heterogeneous in many ways because a lot of my neighbors are Hungarian. We have essentially bilingual signage everywhere. It used to be more Christian, but even here, you essentially have a lot of Christians. I think people would probably still say at least 80% of them, I don't have the latest figures, but 80 to 90% would call themselves Christian. But the denominations here are very different as well. I mean, I'm Catholic myself, but my neighbor I know is Protestant Reformed from Hungary. The main population here is still Romanian. They're Orthodox Christian. So it's strange because you have these two, like I said, these two magisteria, and they do kind of overlap with ethnicity a little bit. Mm-hmm. But they also, the state here is a completely separate entity. I mean, it has been in a very forceful way since communism, the cleaving off of the church completely from the state, completely from every public matter. Now it's kind of had a revival after communism, but not not quite. I think people kind of got used to being a bit atheistic just because that's what they were taught in schools for 50 years. So yeah, it is an interesting concept to contemplate how that would materialize and how, the concept of the nation would work here, overlapping the concept of religion, and then kind of unite people into this superstructure. Obviously in Eastern Europe, you also have the tensions coming with the West because, unfortunately, I think one of the biggest forces against any form of kind of Christian nationalism here is the kind of this osmotic pressure with the West, because a lot of people here, to be honest, either want to replicate the West here or they want to move to the West. And a lot of them just move to the West. We've had quite a lot of brain drain and a lot of people moving abroad, just, for better jobs, opportunities. So it's a strange thing to figure out, because obviously I'm also inclined to projects such as yours, but in terms of just the physical reality of the substrate that I'm dealing with, obviously I can imagine North Carolina is a completely different place, but just imagining how that would actually happen on the political stage and how people would be motivated to make it happen, I don't know. At least I don't see it for this region. Like I said, I'm not that familiar with kind of local realities in the U.S., but yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, I think what I always like to say is that we have in our different kind of people groups, we have like a nation, like a heritage of faith, in the sense that there is, like in Eastern and Central Europe, of course, heritage of faith. And you said it's kind of oriented along like ethnic lines a little bit, and so I don't know exactly what kind of political. I mean, this is the difficulty. You have ideas. How do you make them? How do you spread them? How do you enact them? This is one of the challenges. It's easy to theorize, right? But sometimes, but then it's hard to actually bring it about and persuade people to. But yeah, I think that what I try to say is that, look, there is a heritage of faith among peoples, and there is a kind of a biblical history and kind of sacred history of people groups, or Israel essentially falling away and then coming back by the work of God. And so I do try to give people hope in that sense when they see their nation, their people kind of declining in religiosity. That even though we shouldn't just kind of sit back and let God do what He does, and kind of just hope and pray, which we should do that as well, but also to act. But at the same time, just know that there is a kind of hope, and God can restore that heritage to actually be more than just potential and being actual. And in the United States, it's hard to know exactly what that'll look like. There is still fairly high religiosity in the United States, I think, compared to the rest of the world. And so but there is kind of, I think there's more fragmentation here religiously than I think in probably Eastern Europe and Central Europe. And it's not even clearly along ethnic lines as either. So most atheists are like white and Jewish, and as I understand it, but then most Christians are white and black. So it's like, it's a weird kind of differences here. But yeah, I again, I think just kind of think about the heritage of faith and look to God to restore the nation, while at the same time we don't kind of sit back and live and let God, or whatever the expression is. But,
Yeah. So
try to convince our fellow man, and that's part of what I'm trying to do. Is I'm trying to convince like American Christians, because there are a lot of us. I mean, you look at the statistics, and there's a lot of people who claim to be born again and evangelical, and there's Roman Catholics here and all that. If we as Christians just were more assertive and said, this is our country, this is our heritage, we want to preserve it along Christian lines, then I think we could actually do it. It's just a matter of will. I mean, this is something that like conservatives have been. I'm sure you've heard conservatives and right-wing people talk about this before. That it really just comes down to the national will to survive, the national will to live. And I think across the West, there is a sort of will to die. And I think we as Westerners and as Christians ought to kind of recover that will to live as a people and to assert ourselves as a people. So that's what I try to do for over 400 pages in the book, is just try to convince people that no, we can act. God has given us the tools to order our society in ways that are for our good, and we have to do that.
Yeah, and I wonder what your view is on kind of the tension between kind of populism and elitism, which this is a huge conversation kind of on the right, and the fact that populism might provide some energy, but it's not enough. I mean, you kind of see this in the example of Donald Trump, who's kind of this populist uprising, but the actual machinery of power is unchanged, even if you happen to change the figurehead. But yeah, the so-called deep state, or the cathedral, or whatever you want to call it, is it's set up and it's populated by members of the regime, whatever the populace might think. So I wonder where you think the impetus for change, like the more promising impetus for change, will come from.
Yeah, I think the most promising will be strong leaders who the average person can both look up to and also identify with. I mean, this is maybe this is very American, but just the idea that he's an everyday man who's also kind of superior, and he's a good example. And one of the problems with Trump is that Trump was good at trolling, but he's not. He wasn't, I'd say, the most effective president, and probably right now not the guy we need. But we need someone that the average guy can look up to, who's both, I'd say, both virtuous and pious, but can lead the sort of the populist, the average person. And I think that's going to have to happen at the state level. So DeSantis isn't perfect either, but that sort of figure who's got a kind of disciplined Trumpian type persona, where he can troll the media, but at the same time govern and put the right people in place within his administration. And I think that it comes. I think what we need is like to prop up, or to place leaders at the state level where the voters have their back, and which kind of empowers these people to have really the will to resist the federal government, to resist the regime, resist corporations, and really kind of encourage them in that way. Because conservatives in the United States they don't want state power being used against enemies. They want the rewards to be spread universally instead of kind of your supporters. They don't like state power, and I think all that needs to change, where we see these people as using the actual levers of power that we've given them as a people, and then they assert themselves against the regime. And again, DeSantis is like a good example of this in certain ways, not perfect, but I think that if the Republican Party does start, and the Republicans start seeing DeSantis as doing a lot of good in that regard, then I think others will follow, and we'll have more and more states kind of raising up state executives and legislatures that are willing to do what's unpopular, and what will make the regime mad, but it's constitutional and can offer some resistance. So I think the populist elements have to be controlled. They have to be directed. They can be wild. Their kind of will has to be kind of terminated upon a great executive man who can kind of direct that and resist the regime.
Yes, I think there's definitely energy to be harvested from the populist movement, and I think especially in the U.S., this local first approach seems to be very promising. That's why I don't necessarily think that the best next move for DeSantis is to run for presidency. I mean, there's already kind of a pattern of inability to change things from the top that Trump laid out. Not that he's better or worse than Trump, but like I said, the guts of the machine, the way the sausage is made by the same people. Like, if you don't have a complete team to change out, rows and rows of the managerial state, it's not gonna happen. You're just gonna be the new boss of, 20,000 blue-haired, women who essentially will completely ignore whatever directives you said. So I think solving things from the bottom up in the sense of becoming kind of this flagship state, which Florida has already become, and setting an example of what's possible and what actually is possible, because he has his team there. Those people know what to do. They've been fighting at the local level for a long time. So I think that's probably, copying that model and just using that as a benchmark would probably be a better service to the respective people of that state than trying to, just tread a path that they just won't let him. That seems to me like, those people are still there. It's not like, the culture hasn't changed that much.
And there's also, it's not just him setting an example. It's him bringing people into his administration at the state level where people can actually learn how government works. Because as I was talking to someone who was in health HHS and with under Trump, and he was saying that one of the big problems is that you could bring people like who are ideologically similar to you or to Trump, but the problem is they don't know how government works. Like they don't know anyone. They're just outsiders who just have like this Trumpian spirit and will and thoughts, but they don't know how actually bureaucracy operates. And so if you have, and I understand this is kind of happening in Florida, is that you're bringing these people in to work actually in the bureaucracy in Florida. They know how it works, and then that can kind of be a base to kind of move people in the federal government. But it might be too soon for DeSantis. I haven't thought about that, but it might be too soon for him to do it now. To kind of try to run for. I mean, it could be that he's thinking he's going to lose or not make it, but he's going to gain the notoriety, experience, and then 2028 is when he'll make his biggest. I don't know, his big push, big campaign.
Yeah. I mean, that's very plausible. This game is quite multi-layered. It's definitely 4D chess, and I'm sure his advisors are very switched on. But it's a weird situation now with the upcoming elections. At least for me, it feels like I don't know, the energy is kind of out of it. I don't know. I know there are a lot of people who are really getting involved in the elections, but for some reason, it just feels like not as interesting as the previous elections were. I mean, I'm a foreign onlooker, obviously, probably not as interesting to me just because it's in a way not my beeswax, but at the same time, it used to be. I was very, very involved in all of this, but I feel like, the theater aspect of it has gotten a bit tiresome. I don't know. Is this something you're feeling on your end, or is everyone gearing up for another, spectacular round of breaded circuses?
I think first of all, it's kind of still early. It's also there's a lot of uncertainty now that Trump has been essentially indicted and multiple. So he might be in jail running for president. So I think there's some spirit of perhaps of defeat. I don't know of defeat, but there's some spirit that the levers of power are that great. So I mean the regime can get away with slapping the hand of Hunter Biden and letting Biden Sr. do whatever he wants, and then Hillary Clinton and then all these other guys who lied and clearly broke laws are let free, and then here's Trump facing kind of might die in prison because of things. So it's like you see the levers of power, and my own personal experience, I've kind of experienced some, I mean, at a very small scale, but that as well, and it's very kind of it's disheartening in a way, just to see that it doesn't matter what you do, you'll kind of get damaged and harmed by these people. So I mean, I think there is that. I mean, it's I just hope that DeSantis has great lawyers. I don't know how it's going to help him. I mean, if he becomes president, it's going to probably be another scandal after scandal. He'll probably handle them better than Trump. But I think that's part of it. Is just it's hard to see how you can defeat this massive regime that can literally do what it wants and blatantly hypocritical, and So yeah, but I don't know. I think we're all kind of waiting and seeing what these guys, what the different candidates can, if they can inspire us to love them. I don't know. At this point, it's like DeSantis seems like he's playing to the donor base more than the populist base, as far as I'm concerned. So I mean, we'll see as it progresses. But I do get the sense. I mean, it's unfortunate the right seems to be like the old Trump kind of intellectual right is now splintering and dividing. Now they hate Trump, and I'm not really interested in picking sides on that yet. But
Yes, I think that's kind of what put me off of it quite a lot. Yeah, it's just the constant fighting between the two camps, and it's, I feel like we can't really afford to be so fragmented. And yeah, it's a strange time to be interested in politics on the internet. I think that's kind of why we tune out. But there's also, a lot of what was interesting to me in this kind of whole space of the new right was a little bit tied into not being so stuck in the mirage of electoral politics. And I feel like, every, few years people get sucked back into that mirage, even people who, their main shtick is Italian elite theory. And they're just, they're waiting for Red Caesar and things like that. And then, they spend 2 years, fighting with Team DeSantis or whatever, or the opposite.
yeah.
And it just feels like so incongruent because, you're someone who's, spends of the 4 years, 2 are spent, critiquing liberalism and democracy as, absurd and stupid. And we need another, so we need to return to monarchy. And then another 2 years just, pulling your hair out because DeSantis is not worthy of whatever the ticket.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very strange, place to be.
Yeah, I've tried to avoid most of that. I have enough trouble just getting a complete sentence out of me. So, so I just I've tried to focus on my own work. The electoral politics. It's easy to get kind of sucked into it and also have form these personal grudges that I don't really want to. I don't want to do that either. But maybe next year I'll become more. I'll give myself maybe 6 months. 6 months of fighting about politics, like electoral politics. But
I think that's a reason, especially for someone writing about politics. It's decent. You have to give yourself a little bit of fighting time. I also wanted to ask about the kind of the nation is one thing, ethnicity is slightly different. I mean, how does the concept of ethnicity play into Christian nationalism? Because I mean, from its founding, the U.S. was primarily an Anglo project. It was tied into certain strains of Christianity that were specific to a certain part of England at that point, and this is baked in to the project. So I wonder if that's something that's essential to the formation of a Christian nation, incidental to it, or how do you see that?
Yeah, the way that I talk about ethnicity is actually, it's very similar to nation. So nation, when we think of nation nowadays, we tend to think of nation states. And so it's kind of everyone who's under a state in some geographic legal jurisdiction. And so I don't use that language just because I recognize that there are, I mean, in kind of your neck of the woods, there's different kind of communities of Hungarians, Slovakian, they all kind of have their own area typically, as I understand. So there is kind of this, under the nation state, there are different ethnic groups in different regions and some fighting for their own autonomy and all that. But so I tried to I actually, as kind of a controversial point where I kind of say I'm using nation and ethnicity largely synonymously. So they didn't like that. But yeah, and in the United States, it's difficult because we're very multicultural in a very kind of somewhat mixed regard. So it's not like we have, this is your city and this is your region and this is ours, and there isn't that kind of ethnic type divide in the United States. So it's very challenging. But part of my argument was to say that ethnicity is not simply just your ancestry or kind of blood relations. It's also a common culture. It's principally a common culture, kind of common history. It's that you and your grandparents and great grandparents participate in the same events. So big unifiers in U.S. history was like World War II. So you have so yeah, like you said, originally it was a mainly kind of Anglo nation, and then you have Italians and Poles, and then Germans and Irish come in the 19th century and in the early 20th century. And World War II was kind of this event where everyone kind of fought together. It was a sense of kind of a unifying type war. People like Teddy Roosevelt considered the Civil War, of all things, actually be a somewhat of a unifying war as well, with the different new people. And of course, the Revolutionary War before that was kind of a unifier. So that's the idea, is that we can connect with these common past events, and that can begin to form an ethnicity. I think that's one of the problems with the United States, is that we don't have kind of this. We had a sort of core ethnicity, which is very Anglo-Protestant, but the Anglo-Protestants literally kind of gave that up. Like it's for most of our history, the dominant ethnic or people group, or the core, the core ethnicity, the conforming ethnicity, was essentially an Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And then all those people said, nah, no more. I mean, it's kind of what, and into the 60s, and now essentially the WASP has been, I guess, has no power anymore. But yeah, I think that's our problem in the United States, is we're in a sense, pardon the language, kind of balkanized, and we're splitting apart in different ways, and we need to have this common sentiment, common a common positive regard for ourselves as a people, and we've completely lost that. And unfortunately, the common sense of who we are is actually very negative. It's essentially that all these different identities and groups are good if they've overcome past oppression. And by the way, the oppressor is a straight white male. So in America, the most hated, the oppressor is a straight white male. And our common narrative of who we are as a people is that these various different groups, kind of an incoherent set of groups, from trans to blacks to whatever, to women, feminist women, whatever, all these different groups have unity based upon a common grievance against the straight white male. And I think that's essentially what our national identity has become. But anyway, I kind of rabbit trailed into that, but I think we should, move back to a positive vision that can unite Americans.
Yeah. I mean, there's, I think this is the Bertrand de Juvenel thesis that, a lot of things in history moved from this coalition of a high and low versus the middle. There's always kind of this churning conflict between an upper stratum elite that wants to maintain its position, and the actual contenders for the elite spots are always kind of just below the elite. And the elite make a coalition with the people at the bottom, with the underclass, and essentially wage war against the middle class. With bread and circuses, all sorts of promises, with ideologies like the ones that you described being something that feeds the lower orders. And it feels to me like, obviously just by looking at this, it seems to fit the model, because the most hated man in the US, and I tell you this as someone who's watched a lot of movies produced by your country, is the hick. It's the uncultured person, the religious person, Bible thumping, straight laced, very, the family from Footloose, from the town in Footloose. Those people that populate that space. And this is essentially the antagonist for the world now. You see this everywhere. Even movies made by people, and they use the same tropes. It's all this like repressed, Christian man who just, wants his daughters to, I don't know, cover up and not date boys, and all sorts of, the tropes. Yeah. But yeah, it feels like that fits. And I wonder what you make of that thesis, that this is kind of a, the outgrowth of class war within the United States. And because the United States is just so culturally dominant, it's been flooding out into the rest of the world.
Yeah. So you're thinking in terms of kind of a class-based type war that really it's the upper, like you said, the upper class uniting with the lower classes in order to kind of beat the middle. Yeah, and I understand that's that history. I don't know if if it is class. I think there is a class element to it in the sense that you have the upper echelon of society has a certain set of pieties, and that piety has to then affirm what you think are like you're calling lower classes, but a lot of the people like certain identities, as I understand, are not actually kind of lower class, like the LGBTQ plus whatever. I don't think those all come from the lower classes, but they are kind of an aggrieved minority. So in a sense of maybe a social, maybe not an economic, socioeconomic order, but maybe a social order, there's a sense in which those people consider themselves oppressed. And the oppressor is that the middle class guy who just wants to generally be left alone and not have to deal with all this nonsense. They want their kids to be successful and not weird. They want them to be normal. And then you have the upper and the kind of the quote, the oppressed uniting to make everything weird and abnormal and deranged. So I definitely think there's something to it. There is a kind of a war against kind of the suburban middle class type ideal. So like the American, when we talk about the American dream or the American ideal, it is very much not becoming rich or becoming whatever you want to be. It's this idea that if you work hard enough, you'll be able to have a nice house and a dog and a couple of kids and a couple of cars, that sort of thing. That's like the American dream in the suburb. And yeah, it does appear that's like they're waging war against that kind of ideal. But for no end other than its destruction. So the end of marriage, the end of having children, and when you have children, they have to become weird. So yeah, that's it. So do you think it's an economic class thing, and it's just kind of manifesting as? Okay.
I don't think so. I think it's kind of like just social class, which is I guess you have kind of the university educated, Ivy League people, especially the so-called like precariat, or I don't know if you know the like elite overproduction thesis, that now with everyone going to college and getting diplomas and having access to more sophisticated academic and office jobs and things like that. There are a lot of people who are kind of in this, elite relatively, in the sense that they went to good schools, but not necessarily making a lot of money, but they're getting paid off with other things. They get paid off with this sense of superiority to the suburban jet ski salesman and his big brood and his Christian beliefs and all these types of things that in the 1950s were kind of aspirational, but now they're not in vogue anymore. They're not sophisticated enough. So now to reach the level of sophistication, you need to kind of be very well versed in critical theory, which is what you get when you go to these universities, and have all of the kind of accoutrement of someone who is learned and knows enough to know that a house in the suburbs is the height of oppression, and being a jet ski salesman or whatever is not enough to be sophisticated and live a worthy life or whatever. Have something meaningful to say on Twitter or wherever these people hang out.
Yeah, I think I think that one kind of common feature is there's a type of resentment that is kind of enacted through policy. So you have like the WASP dominance that, like the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant dominance in the 19th century, in the 20th century, into the 50s and 60s, and just dominated the universities. I mean, Protestants founded most of the major universities in the country, in the East Coast, and those are eventually, as like I said, the WASP kind of gave them up, and now they're kind of taken over by the left. But there's also a kind of that American ideal is kind of waspy. I mean, it's very universal and open to all. But at the same time, when you think of the old picture of the house and the dog and the two kids and barbecuing in the backyard, they always kind of look like regular kind of white folks from Anglo origins of some sort. And you do kind of get the sense that there might be a kind of resentment, resentful reaction to that from the left. I think there is some truth to the idea that the left are, I know this is probably an exaggeration, but deformed freaks. But what does that mean? I forget what it is. It's
Yeah, it was
exaggeration, but
from Mystery
yeah,
Grove
who
Publishing.
exact like
Yeah.
their revenge upon the beautiful or something. Again, it's exaggeration, but I think there's some truth to that. And so, as the left start populating the universities, they now kind of control the knowledge production of the universities. Some of it's true, some of it's garbage, but the whole thing as a package deal is essentially training young people who go into the universities to be equally resentful. And then you find a bunch of aggrieved minorities from race and then gender and now into this and like sex and now gender. And you have this mass of people who are literally reacting to the very thing that I think the left didn't like and wanted to kind of attack, and that was just regular stable suburban life being normal according to, I guess, standards of the 50s. And so now the left is at the upper echelons are now kind of uniting with these oppressed identities to literally attack like you said, that middle kind of normal group. For the very things that make them normal, which is just stable families, two-parent, heterosexual union and having children and children becoming, heterosexual as well. And so I think there's something to that where like literally these identities are being wielded as instruments for like exacting revenge and resentment upon these people who kind of once were dominant and now are kind of are going down.
Yeah, the most hopeful thing about this, unfortunately, is that this is a form of eating the seed corn. I mean, you can only support this type of erosion of society up to a certain point where you can see this now a little bit in Silicon Valley. You have quite a few of the bigger people in Silicon Valley becoming quite reactionary. Seeing what this does to their company, seeing what this does essentially to their opportunities to make money as well, because once you replace, things that questionable dimensions like meritocracy and stuff like that, but at least they were hiring good people for the good jobs with this whole essentially religious superstructure of strictures and things that are imposed by law, which is all downstream from civil rights. There's people are losing money and they don't like to lose money, and they see how terrible it is. And this is just kind of a little example, but you will see this in everything from bridges collapsing to planes falling out of the sky, because at one point something's got to give. And if the superordinate value here is this creed that you're laying on top of society, and this is the most important thing, things are going to go awry, and the next generation of elites will not align with this, because not only is it's not functional, and obviously for intelligent people it's going to become transparent that this doesn't work. But after a while, it's also low status, because what you have now is the phenomenon of the hick lib, where literally people from the heartland and places like this are becoming very liberal. They I don't know if you've seen all these memes about Yellowstone and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's now kind of trickling into the low status stratums of the culture, and the elite will not want to be associated with that. So I think there's kind of a serious reactionary, very maybe classically conservative, maybe Scrutonian. There's all sorts of interesting directions this could go into. Yeah. But I think a lot of the new people coming up will not. We just don't find it interesting. It's dumb. It's low status.
Yeah, I mean, you have more hope than I do. I mean, I guess there is. I do feel like that's kind of a conservative narrative that eventually things are going to get bad enough where people are going to wake up and say, no more. But
it always does historically. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 50 years, but eventually something's got to give. It's just not, it's not sustainable to be swimming against reality.
I think that that new elites are being trained to tolerate disorder and to tolerate like essentially living in filth. And they won't actually like they'll witness the filth and they'll just redirect that to blame their enemies. So instead of saying we have to have more of a we can't do these quotas, these like identity quotas, and this is ruining things, planes and all that, and like the trains are crashing and all that. I think they're just going to redirect that and say, see, we're still a racist society. We're still a sexist or, transphobic and homophobic.
Yeah.
We're still that. And they're going to just redirect that.
I can see that. That's what's
just
happening
get worse.
now.
What's that?
I think that's what's happening now. I think, you can see people double down. But I mean, people who are really smart and people who are, their main business is not deluding themselves. I feel like people you're talking to are very visible and they're essentially saying this right now. But I feel like they're one maybe standard deviation of intelligence below the people that I mean that are still silent, and they're actually, they can put two and two together. Like if you walk through a place like San Francisco and, there's open air drug markets and, people are yelling at you and threatening you in the street and defecating next to you and stuff like that. If you have enough brain cells to rub together and you're not, just completely ideological, maybe slightly autistic as well.
Yeah, I think that helps.
Then you'll put two and two together, and maybe you're not the most outspoken activist, which is the people you see online. But yeah, I think a lot of people are waking up to this, and obviously Silicon Valley and San Francisco is very vivid example of this playing out. But I know a lot of people are much more based than they say in the shadows. How much force they can exercise, that's a different question. When they will, that's also a different question. But they know, a lot of people know what's going on. But yeah, it's not out there yet.
Yeah, I just one of my concerns, I have like several concerns with all that, but one of my concerns is that there's this liberal kind of, or not liberal, but like a conservative kind of cope, and I'm not saying you do this, but there's kind of this cope to say, well, we don't really need to do anything about this because the left is so full of contradictions that they're just going to collapse on their own. And I think that's not a good perspective to come from, and I get that sense from some people. And so I think that like we shouldn't look to like the left contradiction actually destroying itself and then kind of revealing a path for conservatism. For I think we actually, as the right, need to, when we have the chance, to actually destroy it ourselves, and not kind of rely on the contradictions of the left.
I'm just saying I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just saying that I think this is a hopeful thing that might happen. I don't necessarily think this is, and this should say much about what people on the right should be actually doing in reality. I think people should be, continuing to try to live out their values in any avenue possible, because, my child is now a toddler. I'm expecting my second son now, and in their life, I'm thinking about their lifespans. I'm not necessarily expecting that things, will change in their lifespan. So I'll try to be politically effective as far as I can.
Well, yeah, and I think that we need to cultivate a certain will to act that is going to be very unpopular. So, like, let's say, like, they're talking about the law to become licensed, the bar exam. I don't know what they call it in Romania, but the bar exam in the United States. There's a lot of talk about making it easier, and why? It's because Black law students they pass at a far lower rate than the non-Black students. And so they say, well, there must be some, instead of, going other routes, they explain it as racism, like in some regard. And so to create an equal, to essentially engineer equality, they have to lower the standards. So then obviously probably the law, like the lawyer profession, the law profession is going to diminish in quality, and all sorts of things cascade from that. Let's say eventually, like in your kids or my kids' generation, they say there is that point where everyone realizes, wait, this is crazy. We have terrible lawyers and the law profession's going downhill. And all of a sudden, like, no, we're going to go back to the old bar exam. And then they have to have like the will to then see, okay, now like there are disparities in outcomes, and they have to accept that. So that's the sort of thing like conservatives and like right-wing people need to cultivate and say, well, there's going to be like there's a reason why these equity measures and this forced equality came about. It's because people didn't have the stomach to deal with disparities in outcome. And so part of like raising up that next generation is saying, no, like we have to be willing to kind of bear this social scorn and have the will to be comfortable in some regard with disparities in outcomes. And I think, as like what you said, I think that's the hicklib. I haven't heard hicklib before. That's good. It's a good phrase. But yeah, I think those are the sort of people who have like lost the will to see that they're obviously they're lost the will to see what's normal and abnormal, and also, but they've lost the will to be comfortable with disparities because they're afraid to be called a racist or sexist or something like that. So, yeah. So anyway, but we just have to kind of cultivate that will to be comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think
which
we
once were, but we no longer are.
Yeah, that's kind of the core of a lot of issues now. Obviously in the U.S. because of its particular history, but all across the West, as inspired by the West and particular histories and these other regions. Yeah. I mean, a place like Romania has not yet been affected by this, I think, but it's coming. I mean, our particular ethnic tensions here are, between Romanians and Hungarians are pretty much on equal footing politically and everything. But obviously, we have the Roma minority here, which was quite a problem until I feel fairly recently, when most of them moved abroad. Making this point, but it's been an interesting solution to our ethnic tensions. Hundreds of years of ethnic tension solved by the fact that they opened the door to Europe, where it's more interesting to live if you're a nomadic type. So anyway, this is very weird parenthesis, but it's there are ways to solve this, but I don't think these are ways in any way applicable to the U.S. There's no other place people would rather be, unfortunately for you.
Yeah, that is true. We're simultaneously the most racist, awful, prejudicial nation in the world, but also the most sought after for citizenship or residence. So it's another just absurdity we tell her that we don't have the will to say it's stupid, and also to resist. I have before brought up Eastern and Central Europe as examples of places where people clearly identify with an ethnic group and see that as kind of their people, and they're not uncomfortable with that fact. Like in the United States, at least among like kind of Anglo like WASP folks here, we're very uncomfortable about affirming that we are something different than others, that we are actually different. I mean, whereas like Italians are okay with it. Of course, Blacks, Hispanics are generally okay with it. But we don't. But in the U.S., we can't have that sort of sense of separation. And if we do, it's wrong. It's like called white nationalist or all sorts of names. But in other countries, it actually seems to be more natural, and people just say, yeah, of course I'm Hungarian and you're Romanian, the Slovakians and Polish. So, I mean, is that true? Am I speaking lies, or is this like a romantic view of Eastern Europe?
It is true, and I feel like pretty much everywhere else in the world where you kind of have these juxtapositions of enclaves and people, which is very common in Eastern Europe, but it's not the only place in the world. It's just normal. Sometimes there are ethnic tensions about this or that territory. I mean, if you ask the Hungarians, Transylvania should belong to them, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. But not in a very virulent way. People are not out in the streets asking for the land back. There's no fistfights about it very often. But I think there is something interesting here. And I mean, as someone, you are a Protestant yourself. I mean, there's a theory. I think this is Curtis Yarvin's theory that within the spirit of Protestantism, there is this kind of egalitarian assumption that animates this, that makes it taboo to be different, to assert yourself as, ethnically unique, or to say that you are special in any way, but that, that there's a universalism unlike any other, but that is at the core of the Protestant faith, and that is maybe a component of the great liquefying thing that we're all in at the moment. So I wonder what you think about this, as someone obviously who knows more about this than I do.
Yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to tell the difference between what would be kind of an English, like an English tradition, like the Anglo-Scottish, which is Protestant. So it's like, which one is responsible for it? Because I think it's absolutely true that Protestants, maybe like incidentally or by principle, have this universalistic, in the world, have kind of had this universalistic mindset. So I think it's absolutely true. The question is that something peculiar to kind of like the Anglo-Scottish type tradition, like political tradition, or is that from the Protestantism, or is it a combination of both? Hungarian Reformed or Protestants, and I don't see that among them. So
definitely not.
I mean, that would be a good counterexample to that. And so I'm not sure that it's inherently Protestant. It might be kind of this kind of confluence of just Anglo political tradition mixed with Protestantism. But I do think, regardless of its origin, I do think there is a universalism to Anglo-Protestantism that was certainly true in the United States. Even in the 19th century, there was this this idea that we are an Anglo-Saxon. We come from the Anglo-Saxons. Our political tradition comes straight out of the German forests and through England. This stuff like this is like Thomas Jefferson is saying things like this. But yeah, in the 19th century, there was this universalist mindset, but it was also Anglo conformity. I mean, if you are German and you're Irish and you come here, you need to essentially assimilate into this Anglo conformity program. And this is why Roman Catholics were a problem, because they didn't easily become Protestant all the time. But still, there was a sense in which we're an Anglo-Protestant country. You all need to become Anglo-Protestant like us. And that essentially dissolved after World War II. And then you have the Immigration Act of 1965, so now all that's essentially dead. The WASP is dead in terms of like the core identity, or the core ethnicity of the United States. But the point being, though, that universalism was even built into that anyone could become Anglo-Saxon Protestant by adopting a way of life. So that there was that universalism, which was then just kind of abandoned for, okay, melting pot will all become a new humanity, a new thing. It's entirely that sort of universalism.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that. Part of my book was essentially trying to argue against that. I was trying to, yes, there is this deep universality to the Western mind, and it's good in a sense. It means that we're open. I think Roger Scruton says things like, "This is what opened us up to the quote Orientalism. This is why we're interested in the East. This is why our arts and music became influenced by these foreign cultures that we encountered. That we brought these things in. We have this sense, but that same thing, which is good, which I think allowed us to produce a lot of good in and for the world, is a contradiction that leads to its destruction. So the idea that a person could come into Germany and in a generation become German, even though he's from North Africa, I mean, to most people that's crazy. Same thing with England and France. French at least seem to have more of like, no, we're French and you're not, but generally speaking, there is that idea that you could all become Dutch and you can all become German, or you can all become Danish from a generation or two. And the United States, of course, is like exactly somewhat like that. But that's got to be critiqued, revealed, and it's like the central, like that is the contradiction that is destroying the West, is that universality.
Yeah,
and I don't know, other than critiquing it, I don't know how else to eradicate it. But
it's a tough one, because, like you said, there's a lot of benefit in that as well, because you don't want perfectly hermetically closed system, because there is utility in being a little bit porous and getting knowledge and the restaurants that we keep hearing about from abroad. But it's very hard for, I think, the Western mind, or maybe the human mind itself, to imagine balance, to imagine a spectrum, that you have to be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. And that's not always congruent with principles. People like principles. They like pronouncements that, you're either for closed borders or you're for open borders. And, the idea that, if you have immigration up to, let's say, I don't know, 1 or 2% of the population, you can still have a stable nation. But if that percentage point moves to 20, that is completely destabilizing and will literally destroy your country. There are people, most people gather around the extremes of that spectrum. There are very few people, at the 3% mark saying, okay, we need to agree on a functional, stable point, and 3% seems to be the sweet spot. I mean, we really need to keep it at 3%, because that's not necessarily a very principled position. It's like, we think this is relatively stable, is not as good as we're for open borders and we are the world and we want to hug refugees and, help the children dying in the Adriatic and all this type of stuff that we had in Europe. And it's also not, we're for closed borders because we, I don't know, the immigrants have destroyed X or Y neighborhood or things like that. So I think it's a bit of a pitfall that people keep falling into because it's just really unsexy to have these, relatively balanced policy positions, because they're not based on anything that concrete. There's not really good data for this. Why is it 3% or why is it 2%?
Yeah, and I think that it's two things. The reason you have these polls, I think, is that we lack like the confidence to say that this is who we are, and this is what we're going to stay. I mean, if you have a lot of confidence in who you are, you can actually receive people, and because then you can have the confidence to say, okay, if you're going to join us, you're going to become one of us. So there is that, when you have the confidence of who you are. I mean, this was like 19th century America, where it's like, hey, Germans, Irish, you can be here, but we're going to try to like anglicize you as like through state power, pretty much. Like, we're going to do that in public schools and all that. Catholics, you're going to go to the Protestants. Like, we had the confidence to say, you're going to become one of us. But then we completely lost the confidence after World War I and World War II, like I said. But if you have zero confidence, you think, well, then what we need to do is just have total state shutdown of the borders, and that's it. So, or you go to the opposite and say, well, whatever, we aren't a people anyway, so let's just let everyone in. Like, that's where the United States is at. Essentially, we say we're a nation of immigrants. So what stops us from allowing in, millions of immigrants every single year? And so that's where we're at. But I think that if we were a confident nation, then we could actually receive immigrants really well in actually ways that benefit everyone, instead of being kind of suicidal, like Germany and France and UK and United States. I mean, one example, and I'm sure you know this more than I do, would be the Polish and the Hungarian reception of Ukrainians. I think Romania took some as well. These countries have, as from my perspective, more confidence in who they are. And so they're able to then say, okay, we'll receive these Ukrainians. But at the same time, they're able to say, we're not going to take these migrants, these quote migrants who are mainly able-bodied men from the Middle East, North Africa. So that I think represents the sort of proper national hospitality, where they say no to some people, knowing that's not going to be good for them, or it's going to be destructive for them. Whereas they say for this other group, okay, Ukrainians, you're gonna be able to stay here, whatever. So, I mean, is that your experience with Ukrainian refugees?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I mean, the reality that you have as a country like Romania. I mean, Hungary maybe is as well, but Hungary is slightly richer as well, and Poland is as well. Is that we're a bit of a transit country for immigrants, so we can almost be confident that this is not the place where they want to actually end up. To be honest, they're just kind of biding their time, waiting to go, a bit further west. Maybe
That's like Greece.
Austria.
It's like, well, we know they're not going to stay here, so let's just kind of regulate the roadways, and knowing
Yeah.
that they're just going to pass on through.
Yeah, but hospitality with the Ukrainians has been really lovely here. I think there's also kind of been a little bit of a government program where I think the EU subsidized our government to subsidize people putting up housing for the Ukrainians, and I'm sure there's been quite a lot of corruption in that because there always is. Who gets the money for the Ukrainians? I'm sure it changed a lot of hands. But yeah, it's been a nice reaction to the war. I mean, I think it's so close to home. It's like I'm a 6-hour drive away from like an active theater of war here where I live. So it's, it feels really like, oh my God, this could be me, people with children. Yeah, it's a very kind of intimate type of war. So yeah, but I mean, not that people would be callous towards, I don't know, Syrian children or something like that, but it's just there are many other countries between Syria and Romania, and it just doesn't, it doesn't feel like that. Plus, when you see the pictures of the children arriving from, who happen to be from Tunisia and Algeria and things like that, you get wise very, very fast to what exactly is going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, most of the migrants, like I said, they just kind of pass through and they hope they can jump ship to somewhere more interesting. Yeah. Anyway, I think we're slowly coming up on time, and I want to make sure I ask you the last question of the show that everyone gets, the subversive thinker question. Do you have any recommended thinker that people might not know that much about, might be underrated? Maybe they know about him, but they don't read him enough. Anything like that?
Yeah, this is like the Fed post question, right? Like who's he?
Yeah, please. You could go for safe stuff as well. No one will judge.
Yeah, there's people who would be more based to, I guess I would say, but I've been beat up enough on those sorts of things. But anyway, you I'm sure know this guy. Actually, I was looking through my shelf. I wonder if I should recommend for this. Rizar Legutko. You could probably say his name better than I can.
Ryszard Legutko. He was on the show as well. Pretty good episode.
Was he? Okay. I read his when I was in grad school. I read his book. I have it right here. Demon and Democracy, and that was really kind of formative for me. And I think he's probably somewhat mainstream in probably Polish politics, I guess, maybe. But
yeah, and dissident right. People love him on the dissident right mostly.
Oh, okay.
I don't think he's that big in Poland because people don't like his conclusions. I think it's a bit too extreme. I think Poland's more of a kind of a fusionist empire. They kind of like their little inland empire that they've built there. But anyway, yeah, sorry for interrupting, but I think he's
that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, I really liked his book Demon Democracy. It kind of from someone who lived through communism and then the post-communist kind of liberalism, the fact that he can describe their similarities and differences, but basically say that like, look, liberalism is just like a type of totalitarianism, but it's just less visible. It's and to read that was really kind of eye-opening.
Yeah, I think
in my grad school days. So
it's
my intellectual journey, it was a good book.
It's an absolutely good book. I know Charles Haywood from Worthy House is one of his favorite books as well, and that's kind of where I got the idea from as well. And I think talking to him on the show, what struck him so much is that he was involved in kind of dissident politics during the communism, especially kind of he's a religious man. He was kind of involved in kind of the Catholic dissidents. And then he saw that once the change happened, the same people were at the helm of the new regime, and he just saw them spouting off the same types of narratives, a little bit toned down, a little bit more freedom infused. We're not working for equality now. We're working for freedom. Now we're not working for these guys. We're working for the EU. We're opening up the country and things like that. But it just sounded too similar. And it wasn't the same, but God did it rhyme, so it was very kind of easy for him to see through it all because he was there through the whole thing.
Yeah, that seemed to happen other places, like it happened in South Africa, other places where just somehow people who were communists for decades all of a sudden are now liberals. So, yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah, it works. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for this. Is number one, a very good recommendation. And I also want to point people toward the book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. Pick it up and find bookstores everywhere and on Amazon.com. And is there any other thing that you'd like people to check out or read or buy?
I don't have anything else to sell, unfortunately. But yeah, I should have an article coming out in American Reformer, which is like a Protestant American, obviously like a publication. So that'll be actually on something we talked about, which on national hospitality. What are the ethics of nations with regard to hospitality to foreigners? And so I try to talk about that. And actually, I think I strike the balance. I hope that you were talking about. So hopefully that comes out this week.
Perfect. Well, I'll link it in the show notes because this is coming out a little bit later, probably just because I'm, as some of my listeners know, I'm highly pregnant at the moment and I'm building up a little bit of a backlog. So there's a bit of continuity to the show while I deal with the business of a newborn for a little bit of time. But yes, I will definitely let you and everyone else know when this comes out.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.